The transmission went on a Tuesday. I was supposed to be in Thunder Bay until Friday, but the truck had other plans. I pulled off Highway 17 just past White River, and the second I stepped out into that August heat, I already knew it wasn't something I could fix on the side of the road. The tow guy said 2 days minimum. I called my wife, Cheryl. She said that was fine, she'd manage, and she asked if I needed her to call anyone. I said no. I booked a room at a motel that smelled like carpet cleaner and spent most of that first night watching the Weather Network and eating chips from the vending machine. But then the parts came in a day early. By Thursday morning, I was back on the road. I didn't call ahead. I figured I'd just show up, maybe pick up some groceries on the way, make something decent for dinner. Our son, Owen, no wait, let me start over with his name. Our son, Declan, was 14. He'd been having a rough stretch that spring. Failing a couple classes, pulling away from us, the usual things you tell yourself are just part of the age. Cheryl had been handling most of it while I was away. I drove long haul, mostly northern Ontario routes, gone 2 or 3 weeks at a time. It wasn't ideal. It never is. I got home around 2 in the afternoon on a Thursday. The house was quiet. Cheryl's car was in the driveway, which surprised me. She'd mentioned she was working all week. She was in the kitchen when I walked in. She startled when she saw me, which I noticed but didn't think much of at the time. "Your truck get fixed early?" she asked. "Parts came in yesterday," I said. I set my bag down and looked around. The house felt off somehow. Too clean, maybe. Or too quiet. "Where's Declan?" She poured herself a coffee and didn't answer right away. "He's doing a program," she said. "A wilderness program. Up near Sudbury." I stood there. "What wilderness program? What are you talking about?" She said she'd made the decision while I was away. That Declan had been escalating, skipping school, mouthing off, coming home at odd hours. She said a woman in her book club had recommended the place. It was called something like Ridgeline Youth Services or Ridgeline Pathways. I can't remember the exact name now. She said it was structured outdoor education. 10 weeks. She showed me the brochure on her phone. It looked like a summer camp, canoes on a lake, kids in hiking boots, smiling. The kind of thing you'd see advertised in a parent magazine in a dentist's office. I asked why she hadn't called me. She said she'd tried to reach me and I hadn't picked up. That was a lie. I check my phone constantly on the road. It's basically the only thing keeping me sane on a 12-hour stretch through the Shield. "When did he leave?" I asked. 11 days ago, she said. 11 days. My son had been gone 11 days and I didn't know about it. I asked for the address. She said parents weren't supposed to visit during the first phase of the program. That was part of the structure. It helped the kids transition. I asked for the phone number. She said the kids didn't have phones during the first phase either. I asked when the first phase ended. She said 6 weeks. I put my bag back over my shoulder and walked out to my truck. Cheryl came to the door. "Martin, they know what they're doing. He needs this." I didn't answer her. It was an hour and 40 minutes to the address she'd given me. I had to pull it up on Google Maps because she hadn't written it down for me. It existed in her phone and I'd had to ask 3 times before she read it out loud. The whole drive there, I kept trying to tell myself it was probably fine. Declan was a stubborn kid, but he was a good kid. Maybe the fresh air would do him good. Maybe I was overreacting. I've always been the more cautious parent, the one who triple checks the car seat and calls when I say I'll call. Cheryl used to tease me about it, but something was pulling at me, the way she'd startled. The way she didn't meet my eyes when she said he was fine. The road narrowed somewhere past Espanola. By the time I reached the turnoff, I was on gravel, and then on something barely wide enough to call a road at all, 2 tracks through second-growth bush. I drove for another 12 minutes before the property opened up. It wasn't a summer camp. There was a long metal building along the back edge of a cleared field, the kind of building you'd see at a nursery or a small-scale greenhouse operation. Next to it was a smaller structure, plywood and sheet metal, looked like it was built recent, and out in the field were kids. Maybe 16, 18 of them. Some were digging. Some were carrying what looked like irrigation pipe. The temperature that day was 31 degrees. I remember because I'd been complaining about the heat on the drive. I got out of the truck. There was a man near the building who came toward me. He was maybe 50, wearing a collared shirt, carrying a clipboard. He smiled the way people smile when they want to look helpful but are actually deciding whether you're a problem. "Can I help you?" he said. "I'm looking for my son," I said. "His name is Declan." His expression shifted just slightly, barely, but I saw it. "Parents aren't scheduled for a visit until phase 2, he said. "You should have received communication about." "I wasn't informed he was here at all," I said. "I'd like to see him." He told me to wait. He went back toward the building. I didn't wait. I walked into the field. I found Declan in the 3rd row from the left. He was on his knees, doing something with a soaker hose and a row of seedlings. His shirt was soaked through. His neck was sunburned, the kind of red that looks like it hurts when you touch it. When he looked up and saw me, he didn't smile. He just stared at me for a second like he was deciding whether I was real. Then his face did something I hadn't seen it do in a long time. He looked like the kid he was at 7, 8 years old, completely open. "Dad," he said. I got down to his level. "Hey, come on. We're going." "Dad, they said you signed papers." His voice was quiet. "They said you gave them permission to keep me here for 10 weeks and I couldn't leave." I looked at him. His lower lip was chapped and cracked. There were dark circles under his eyes that I didn't think were just from sun and sleep. "I didn't sign anything," I said. "I didn't know you were here." He blinked. Something moved across his face that I don't have a precise word for. It was relief and it was rage at the same time. "They told us our parents all agreed," he said. "They said if any of us tried to leave before the program ended, we'd be placed in a juvenile facility." I stood up. I took his hand and we started walking back toward the truck. The man with the clipboard stepped in front of us near the edge of the field. He told me that removing Declan from the program before Phase 1 completion would constitute a breach of the enrollment agreement and that the organization reserved the right to contact authorities. He was calm when he said it, practiced. He'd said this before. I looked at him. I am not a large man, and I'm not a confrontational one by nature. I spent 20 years driving long haul specifically because it suited my preference to be alone and quiet. But I have a temper, and I'd been holding it for the last 90 minutes of that drive. "He's 14 years old," I said. "He's my son. I didn't sign anything, and you're going to get out of our way." He said he'd need to verify that with program administration. He said there was a legal agreement. He said the word legal 2 more times in the following 30 seconds. I got my phone out and called 911 right in front of him. That changed things. He took a step back. He started talking about how this could all be resolved through proper channels, how there were protocols. I kept the phone to my ear and kept walking. Declan stayed right at my side. The dispatcher asked what the nature of my emergency was. I told her I was at a property near Espanola and that my minor son was being held without my knowledge or consent, and that a representative of the property was currently impeding our exit. I gave her the gravel road address I'd put in my GPS. She told me to stay on the line and that an OPP unit was being dispatched. We waited by my truck. The man with the clipboard disappeared into the building. Some of the other kids in the field had stopped working and were watching us from a distance. Declan hadn't said much since we started walking. He was sitting in the passenger seat with the door open and I crouched in the frame of it, not really saying anything either. Then he said, "There's a kid in there. He's 12. His name's Marcus. No, his name's Theo. He told me his parents split up last year, and neither of them came to drop him off. Some person from a social services office did. He cried the second night. They made him do extra field work the next day as a consequence." I looked at my son. "He asked me last week," Declan said, "if I thought anyone was going to come for him." The OPP arrived 40 minutes later, 2 units. There was a long stretch of time that afternoon that involved a lot of standing in gravel and talking to officers and a property manager who produced a folder of paperwork that he seemed very confident about. I had no paperwork. What I had was my son sitting in my truck and the absolute certainty that whatever my wife had signed, I had not. The officers asked Declan some questions, separately, without me. He was in there for about 20 minutes. When he came out, the officer who'd spoken to him had a different quality to her face than when she'd gone in. They didn't let the property manager take Declan back. They were careful in how they phrased it, the way police are when they're in uncertain legal territory, but they didn't let it happen. One of them told me that given the circumstances, and given what my son had described about the conditions and the claims staff had made to the kids about parental consent and juvenile facility threats, there would be a follow-up investigation and that I should not remove Declan from Sudbury District until I'd spoken to an OPP investigator the following day. I said that was fine. I wasn't planning on going anywhere. I asked about the 12-year-old. There was a pause. The officer said they were aware of other minors on the property and that the situation was being assessed. I don't fully know what happened in the next 72 hours. I know that the OPP made contact with Child Services. I know that within 2 days the property had been visited by at least 3 different agencies. A local TV crew showed up outside the gates on the second day, though I have no idea who called them. Declan saw it on his phone. Cheryl had finally given it back to him after he came home, and he didn't say much about it. He just put the phone face down on the kitchen table and went to his room. Cheryl and I didn't yell at each other. I want to be clear about that, because when I've told this story to people, they always expect a screaming match, some kind of dramatic confrontation. It wasn't like that. We sat at the kitchen table the night Declan came home, and she cried and I didn't, and she kept saying she thought it was going to help him. She genuinely believed it. The woman from book club had shown her testimonials. There was a website. It looked credible. I believed her, in the sense that I believed she had been deceived. I also believed that she'd made a major decision about our child without telling me, had signed documents I hadn't seen, and had spent 11 days knowing exactly where Declan was while telling me nothing. I don't know how you separate those two things cleanly. I'm not sure you can. She retained a lawyer almost immediately, which I think was probably the right call given the investigation. I retained one too, a few days later, mostly to understand what our position was regarding the program and what liability there might be on our end for having enrolled him. Our lawyer said the enrollment agreement Cheryl had signed contained a number of clauses that would not hold up under Ontario family law, particularly given that it was signed by one parent without the knowledge of the other. That was actually useful to know. The organization, Ridgeline, or whatever it was officially called, was subsequently found to be operating without the required licensing for a youth residential facility under Ontario regulations. The property manager was charged with several counts related to unlawful confinement of minors. There were 18 kids on that property when I drove up. 18. The youngest was 11. I didn't know that until much later. Declan told me he'd suspected there were younger ones but hadn't seen them directly. They were apparently housed separately. The investigation ran for several months. Cheryl cooperated fully. Her situation was reviewed by Child Services as part of the broader inquiry, and ultimately no charges were brought against her. But it was a long fall for both of us. She moved out in October, not because I asked her to, but because she said she needed to not be in that house for a while. I didn't argue with it. Declan and I were alone in the house from October through to February. That was the stretch that was hardest in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not because he was difficult. He wasn't, not anymore, but because I didn't know how to be the person who was always there. I'd been the one who was always leaving. 20 years of it. I knew how to be present in short bursts, how to be the dad who showed up, grilled some burgers, asked about school, then disappeared for 2 weeks. Suddenly I was the one making dinner every night and driving him to school and being there when he had nightmares, which happened more than I expected. I'm not a particularly expressive person. Neither is he. We had a lot of evenings where we watched whatever was on TV and didn't talk much, and I used to feel guilty about that, like I should have been doing something more therapeutic, more intentional. But I think he needed normal more than he needed processed. He needed Tuesday nights and cereal in the morning and someone who was just there consistently, without agenda. In November, there was an ice storm and the eaves trough on the north side of the house came down. We spent a Saturday fixing it, which mostly meant me on a ladder, and Declan handing me things and making observations about my technique that were accurate but unsolicited. At one point he said, out of nowhere, "Do you think that other kid got out?" I knew which kid he meant. "I think so," I said, based on what the officer said. He handed me a bracket. He said his dad was in BC. I keep thinking about that. I didn't say anything right away. I came down off the ladder and we sat on the back steps for a while. It was cold, the kind of November cold that settles in around 3 in the afternoon and doesn't let go. "I think there were people who went looking," I said eventually. "That's usually how it works." He didn't look convinced. I wasn't entirely convinced either, but it was what I believed, or wanted to believe. He nodded and went inside. The property manager was convicted the following spring on 2 counts of unlawful confinement of a minor and 1 count of fraud in connection with the enrollment fees parents had paid. He received a sentence of 4 years. His business partner, a woman who had handled the intake and documentation side of the operation, received 2 years. The organization's assets were seized. There were civil suits filed by several families, including one on Declan's behalf, which is still ongoing as far as I know. Cheryl and I separated formally in the spring. It wasn't acrimonious. It was just the thing that made sense. She sees Declan on a regular schedule now, and their relationship, from what I can tell, is complicated in the specific way that it was always going to be. That's between them. I stay out of it. Declan turned 15 in June. He asked if we could drive up to Killarney for the long weekend and rent a canoe. I said sure. We spent 3 days on the water, mostly in silence, which suited both of us. The first morning out, we paddled into a bay that was so still it looked like mercury, and he stopped paddling and just looked at it for a while. I let him look. When we got back to the truck on the last day, he said, "I looked it up. That kid got out." His name is actually posted in one of the news articles from the investigation. He was placed with an aunt in Kelowna. I didn't say anything for a moment. The gravel lot was empty. The afternoon light was coming in at a low angle through the trees. Good, I said. Yeah, he said. Good. We drove home with the windows down. He fell asleep somewhere around Perry Sound, head against the window the way he used to do as a small kid. I drove the rest of the way in quiet, watching the shield roll by in the last of the light. There are organizations that use the language of help, of growth, of character building, and they use it precisely because that language works. It works on parents who are scared and tired and love their kids and don't know what else to do. It worked on my wife, who is not a stupid woman. The packaging matters. The testimonials matter. The professional-looking website matters. And by the time you realize what's underneath all of it, your kid has been there 11 days already, working in a field in 31-degree heat, being told you agreed to it. I think about that a lot. The gap between what those words are supposed to mean and what was actually happening in that field. The way the man with the clipboard was completely calm. How many times he must have said those words. Proper channels, legal agreement, phase 1 protocol, to how many other parents before I showed up on a Thursday afternoon 2 days early because a transmission went on a truck in White River. I drove long haul for 23 years. I've had breakdowns on the 17, on the Trans-Canada, once on a logging road north of Wawa that took 6 hours to sort out. You start to feel like the breakdowns are just the cost of the job, just the friction of it. You don't look for meaning in a cracked transmission housing. But I think about that Tuesday a lot.